devil. Padric O'Connor drove the mail cart for the villages in the southern end of the Irish county of Langford. He had been driving the same route for years, and his father had done it before him, and his father before that, back and back, as far as anyone could remember. The donkey-drawn cart was a little outmoded in other parts of the world, but the traditional Celtic villagers and farmers in those parts had a deep-seated mistrust of motor cars and other such newfangled notions. Padric was not least among these, so he continued to drive his cart. One evening in early spring, Padric was on his way home to his little cottage outside the village of Bransom. The days were still short, and the gloaming gathered in the east as he approached the stretch of woods that still separated him from his warm hearth. The day had been abnormally cold and overcast, and now a heavy fog was creeping in from the bogs and marshes to the west. The dark mass of the gnarled and scarred trunks of the old trees flowered forbiddingly as he drove up. A man appeared by the side of the road, right at the forest edge. Padric jumped, violently startled. At first, he thought this man was one of the fairy, for he had seemed to appear out of the air. A strange feeling of mingled apprehension and expectancy grew like a bubble in Padric's breast, then burst quite suddenly as he realized that the fog could easily have hidden him from view. The man raised his hand in greeting and called in a cheery voice, "Hello there! May I have a lift?" Padric pulled on the reins and peered at the man from under his cap. He was dressed in a tweed suit of the latest cut, with a flannel scarf twisted about his neck. Upon close inspection, Padric decided that the man wasn't fey, yet there was something strange about him. His face was handsome, with dark, sparkling eyes, a straight nose, a strong bearded chin, and curly black hair that spilled onto his forehead. He was quite tall and solid-looking, but he seemed light and bouncy, as if gravity didn't affect him as much as it should. Padric shuffled stiffly to the side, making room for the stranger. "Aye, up," he said in his gruff voice. The stranger did indeed hop up with a light and easy grace. It seemed to Padric that he jumped in the cart with one great leap, and he landed quite softly. The stranger settled back on the seat. As Padric urged his donkey into motion, he peered sideways at him from behind his bushy brows. There was a look of cunning in the stranger's eyes, and a slightly contemptuous smirk about his mouth. But he seemed friendly enough. "Fancy a game of cards?" the stranger asked after they had been creaking along for some minutes. "Aye, but it's rather dark out in it," Padric replied. "Oh, not to worry, I have a candle here," said the stranger, pulling a tiny stub of wax from his pocket. Padric eyed it dubiously, but as the strange man had already lit the candle and set it between them on the seat, he decided not to say anything. The stranger shuffled and dealt the cards, and they began again. Padric was so absorbed in the game that it wasn't until a good while later that he realized how long they had been playing. To judge from the light of the gibbous moon that rode high in the sky above them, it must have been at least 2 hours, yet they hadn't left the woods yet. This was odd, as it usually only took half that time to get through the wooded area. He looked at the candle. It hadn't gone down at all. Padric slowly turned his gaze to the stranger that sat beside him. He was looking at the cards in his hand, deciding what to play next. He had removed his cap, and with a thrill of terror, Padric saw 2 little horns poking through his curly hair. He bent over to look at the stranger's feet, but there weren't any feet to see. There were hooves. Padric sat up and looked in his face. The stranger stared at him with a cold, cunning grin. Its face changed, no longer handsome, but twisted and evil with a horrible leer. The devil, for devil it was, snarled and reached for Padric as he yelled and leapt from the cart. He fell and struck his head on a stone, and all was dark. The next morning, Padric woke in his own bed at home. He started up in terror, but realizing where he was, he felt that it must have been a dream. He rubbed his head. It throbbed painfully. "I must stop drinking that gin of an evening. It does do queer things to the head." He stumped out and got up his breakfast and ate it as he usually did. He put the dream behind him and went to harness his donkey. The cart was sitting in its usual place at the back of the barn, and it wasn't until Padric pulled himself up into the seat that he noticed something unusual. It was a little stump of candle, placed exactly where the stranger had left it the night before.